Welcome to the discussion today on filters and HVAC to mitigate COVID. It's a topic that's changing continuously, and the need for it, certainly here in the United States, with all the deaths and things that we have here, isn't going to go away soon. But one of the aspects of it, which is starting to penetrate, is, and I use that, I guess, in a loose way, a large amount of the virus is being transmitted by small aerosols, either directly or after a stop on an inefficient mask, filter, or other surface. So this is a huge development from some months ago when we thought it was all in coughs and sneezes and not going to be transmitted through the air. Now it looks like it's just about the other way around. And with the fact that the inefficient mask can act as an aerosol generator, whether it's caught initially on a cloth mask or not, it's going to get airborne. And so, just looking at some of the numbers, if you're not wearing a mask, the total amount of virus that's going to be emitted would be the 100%. If you're wearing an N95 mask, that's going to be way down. But if you're wearing a cloth mask, ultimately 80% of it is still going to be in the atmosphere. And so if you're in an Uber vehicle, for instance, and the driver and the passengers all have cloth masks on, 80% of the virus is still going to be airborne. So it's certainly going to be important to have more efficient filters. But it's not just for COVID, it's for all the air pollutants, both indoor and outdoor. And Christine's son is on the call with us today. And Christine, you just had an open educational webinar that we're linking to from this slide. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what transpired? Yeah, I'm not sure if...
Appears she's on mute. Christine, if you could unmute your microphone. There it is.
Yeah, Christine, tell us a little bit about the open educational webinar.
Went back to muted. Looked like it was unmuted for a second there.
Okay. While she's unmuting, I think, and we don't reflect it here, we have been collecting a lot of information about the impact of indoor and outdoor air pollution on sickness and death. And it's pretty impressive. And even in places in the United States, for instance, now we're getting more sophisticated tools so we can measure metals, not just use fine particulate as a surrogate. And so, for instance, on PM 2.5 in St. Louis, they were well down on the ambient levels that they needed. And then they installed some metal analyzers that would measure the quantities of arsenic and lead and other pollutants in the air, and found out that when the wind is blowing from the lead smelter, you get excessive quantities of these toxic metals, even though the total particulate is well below the standards. So I think as the efficiency of measuring these trace pollutants, but very toxic ones, is perfected, there's going to even be more reason to be installing more efficient filters. Yeah, Christine, have you joined us now, or are you unmuted now? Yeah, I think
appears she dropped off, so she may be trying to relog in.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, why don't you kind of watch that for us, Ross, and we'll have her answer that question once she gets back on with us.
Okay.
Um, we're trying to understand what happens with the millions and millions of particles. 7.5 million particles are breathed in every minute by the average individual. They get down, some of those, many of them get down into the lungs, most of them do, and we are trying to find out what happens to them. And then as droplets, very small droplets are actually caused by the breathing function of oxygen being intake and CO2 being discharged, that you've got fine droplets, but you have very large droplets too. And the University of California at San Diego has evaporation droplet specialists, and we've been interviewing Abhishek Sahu, who is a professor there, who's a specialist in this area, and he concurs with our thinking that what you have here is their model, which shows what happened to these droplets, as they get smaller and smaller in the airstream after there's a cough, and then they become dry crystals they're very small. And so we're now saying what happens if, say, right at this point here, you put a filter or a mask, then the chances that that large droplet is going to stay on that filter and mask and not end up in the same trajectory is pretty minimal. So I think this is the kind of research that's needed to ascertain the actual facts. And so, but this completely changes the concepts of filter efficiency. The NIH even disputes the fact that there are large amounts of virus and cough and sneeze droplets, and instead, what they say is that breathing has 87% of the particles that are breathed out are less than 1 micron, and 42% of the those in cough droplets are less than 1 micron. And the similar distributions as you go 1 to 4 microns, pretty much the balance of it, and beyond 4 microns, there's almost nothing in the breath and 35% in the cough. So even without this phenomenon of the aerosol regeneration, you've got a large portion of the aerosols being airborne. By the way, if anybody has any suggestions or thoughts or comments or whatever along the way, this is what it's all about. So don't hesitate to unmute yourself and make a comment. So this is we're encouraging the discussions. Another way to go ahead.
Christine is back on the line, so if she
Yeah,
wants to unmute herself, the mute controls are at the bottom of the screen. If you put your cursor down there, you can see where your mic control is.
I'll make this one comment, and we'll go back to Christine then, that the droplets on an inefficient filter media can be visualized as raindrops on a screen. But the one difference is that the filter media, with the filter media, the droplet will be subjected to many forces. The velocity of inhaled air will be relatively uniform across the mask, but the velocity of exhaled air will be uneven, and you will have relatively even discharge velocity through a filter. The August 18th alert documents jets of air escaping a loose-fitting mask. In the August 11th alert, Duke documents more droplets being generated with an inefficient mask than with no mask. Another alert documents finding more virus outside the mask than inside. The continuous airflow across an inefficient filter will evaporate droplets and transport small droplets and non-volatile residues. Okay, Christina, have we got you unmuted yet?
Looks like she still is. So if she could move her cursor down to the bottom of the screen, she'll see the mic control down there. There she is. Yep, she's unmuted now.
Hi there,
I
Christina.
apologize. Good morning, everyone. It seems that I have some issues with my computer, so I log in again with my phone. So thank you, Bob, for this opportunity. Actually, yesterday we did have a very informative webinar, primarily on indoor air quality and also how to managing to keep it safe. And we had two distinguished speakers, and they actually share some of their new findings. And Jim Rosenthal, he actually did a lot of work related to how the aerosol transmitted and also how the particle concentrations in a room, and with different room size and also time frame, how the particle concentration change. And some of the interesting result is one of them is like if you wear the shield, it doesn't help. You have to wear face mask and the shield, face shield. And another speaker, Dr. Annie, she shared some of the information related to how to make informative decisions based on the data, how we get the data from your indoor environment and make an informative decision. And the webinar was 1 hour, and it's on YouTube. If anybody interested, you feel free to check on the details. I think it's very, for me, it's educational, and also there's a lot of recent experiment and findings and discussions. At the end of that, we have 10 minutes discussion. We received some questions, and some participants, and actually they are experts in the field, also make a lot of good comments. So you are welcome to just check our website, get the YouTube link, and I think Bob, you have that as well.
Right. Yeah. Here's a link directly to the YouTube, so you can go into the Waterloo Filtration Institute website, or you can click right on this for it. And relative to the face shields that you mentioned, we think it's equally important there that if you cough or sneeze onto a face shield, all that's going to happen is you're creating an aerosol generator. So, you know, the idea that a droplet, first of all, it's going to evaporate. So the idea that droplet would evaporate off the face shield is without injecting particles into the air is pretty far-fetched.
Yes, I think if you check with some of the new updates, face shield probably blocks some of the aerosols when you're coughing or sneezing. However, it won't protect you if there is particles or aerosols in the air. Actually, there is a suction. Probably it's not helpful just to wear the face shield. You have to wear both.
Right.
That's the conclusion from Mr. Jim Rosenthal.
And then Ellie, I think has got a lot of good comments, and I think looking at this whole problem on a holistic basis with all the right measurements of everything from the CO2 in the room, temperature, humidity, particles, and I do think that that particle counters can be a surrogate for the virus. So is that Claire certainly is a subsidiary of Man and Hummel, and they've got a lot of good comments.
Right. So for people who don't know Jim Rosenthal, he's a president and CEO of Air Relief Technologies, and Dr. Ali and it's Aminessa. She is the CEO of Kellar. So both of them is pretty, I think, is experienced in the field, and also they are pretty active in recently in all the discussions related to aerosol and air filtration and how to protect from virus infection. So I think it's highly encouraging you if you want to know, if some of the questions asked like, what is a safe occupancy rate for a building, or should I wear a face shield instead of a mask? I think Jim's data shows you it's really, really very easy to understand, but if you don't watch, I think after I actually listen what he said, I think it's a great education program. And how can we reduce the risk of the virus infection in the general building and office when we return back to business, and how do we have the right filtration excuse me, how do we should have the right filtration system in the building? So I think a lot of interesting questions is on debate. So at the end of that, we do have several experts like Nick Ponian and Kathleen Owen and several other experts. They share their thoughts with us. So I think it's for public safety and health is tremendously helpful. That's what we actually feel passionate about with also work with Bob and with all these webinars. Hopefully we can actually get some of the educational information to the public and to be helpful in such kind of environment.
Well, thank you, Christine. It's a lot of the work that you're doing is certainly well worthwhile. You've had a lot of different activities, and we hope to keep updated on them. Now let's move on to what we call one-stop versus direct flight. To measure the potential virus transmission of airline travelers from Seattle to Atlanta, you need to take into account one-stop as well as direct flights. And the same is true for masks and filters. And so we really need a new testing protocol. And somebody who's on the cutting edge of all this is Bob Burkhead of Blue Heaven. And Bob, you want to tell us a little about your test loop and what you're doing and how it might be applied for this question as well.
I'd be glad to talk about it. Thank you, Bob, for the opportunity. What you're seeing on the screen is just the result of several customers asking for the dynamic impact of how filters perform. We really have no and very little backup to confirm performance of a product in a recirculating loop or how it appears to clean a room specifically. So what you're seeing here is what they call an AHAM room. The room air cleaner test protocol is basically that box of a room that you see there, but it's normally isolated from the outside, and just a simple decay rate test is done on room air cleaners, and that's how they're technically advertised. The extra loops you see there are the result of an inclination to understand how the dynamics change. When you start recirculating air in a room, things dramatically change, and they're not predictable, they're not intuitive, and we needed a way to do this. So this is like any other great idea. It was by necessity to create a way of evaluating this. So we've used this setup to do quite a bit of analysis of technologies that can't be tested any other way. You know, single pass testing is the traditional way of testing air filters, and it just doesn't lend itself to understanding and quantification of performance. So basically it occurred just to supply that need in the industry, but it's taken a life of its own. We run this combination quite often, and we can vary the protocols. For instance, the AHAM protocol is a US protocol, but the Chinese version, the Canadian version, Australian version, all can be run in this machine. And the loop you see there is a simple performance testing of standard HVAC filters connected to it. And then there's one extra loop there, if you happen to notice. It's a conditioning loop. What we did learn pretty quickly is that heavy recirculation of air can change the physics of the air quite a bit. You can dry it out or raise the temperature quite a bit without intending to do that, and that changes the testing protocol. So you need a loop, and you need to be able to make sure the temperature doesn't drift up and the humidity doesn't drift down. And we've added all that just to accommodate that expectation. So again, it looks elaborate. It's just a mix of technologies that are old but work well in doing a dynamic assessment like this.
So one of the certainly important tests to make would be the efficiency of meltblown electrostatically charged media over time, would it not?
Yes, you could pretty easily identify any drift in performance if it is dropping for any reason. And it could be a charged product too, but it could be other issues as well. You can quantify it pretty easily. What is pretty unique about this is that we talked about this earlier offline. Any instrument that we own, any measurement instrument, could be applied to this technique. So what you're seeing there is a loop, but you don't have to test particulates. You could test droplets or VOCs, many other chemical SOx, NOx, ammonia, formaldehyde, anything that you have an instrument to measure, you could bolt to this room and measure and quantify that performance as well. So it becomes a much broader assessment tool when you consider that aspect.
Yeah, and there's some new technologies to try to remove CO2 as well. I suppose that obviously would be worthwhile testing in a loop like this to see how efficient it actually is. And you mentioned offline talking about ozone measurement if you're using an ionizer as opposed to an alternative device for the removal, how much ozone gets build up, and you can measure that as well. Correctly? Correct?
That's correct. Again, just it's a matter of limited resources on instruments. You can literally put anything you want there. There are several new rulings out in the industry for indoor air quality. One is the state of California's requirement for minimum ozone generation on any product. And that can easily be quantified this way as well. So again, what you're seeing here is a useful tool that got born because there were many needs to assess what we call dynamic performance. There just wasn't an easy way to do that. And now this makes good sense to do.
Yeah, it would seem like, Freudenberg has this citric extract for inactivating viruses, and of course viruses are also impacted by humidity and temperature and so forth, and your ability to control these things would seem to be valuable in determining the long-term efficacy of something like the Freudenberg fruit extract technology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, already, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Already some very, very interesting parts have been already covered. In the automotive industry with our HVAC systems, let's say we are totally focused so far on the definition, let's say, of air quality based on, let's say, cleaning it from the fresh air. But now we have, let's say, our potential, let's say, emission source is now sitting inside the car. And due to, let's say, how to call it, economic reasons, there is always a need, let's say, to let the HVAC run a lot under the recirculation mode. Especially, we have a big project now with Daimler and Evobus in this field. And the first requirement from them was, of course, let's say, we also want to have it in the recirculating mode. And we should always be aware that we have this magic triangle of air cleaning, ventilation, and source control. And what is very essential is that we are, let's say, going to qualify our filter in a way of, let's call it, let's say, removed bioburden per hour. So because the critical point is not what is, let's say, in the mind of the people when we have high, let's say, airflow rates, because then the air exchange rate is helping us to keep the cabin clean, I would say. The problem we have when we have, let's say, a standard mechanism of, let's say, controlling the HVAC, when the temperature conditions are okay, they, let's say, they bring the airflow down. And this is the critical point. And at this moment, we need the high filter performance. And this is a very essential findings, and it costs, let's say, some kind of, how should I say, convincing the customers that we have a focus, should have a focus on that. And what we also should separate in this context, our filters work, let's say, as my colleague Saru defined it in two stages. The first stage is, let's say, the classical filtration. And what was very interesting that was mentioned, this essential point is the, let's say, input particle, or let's say aerosol concentration. And I'm totally delighted what you mentioned when I just saw these keywords, what you mentioned, that the outcome of such a process of the aerosol generation is a dry crystallized, let's say, particle. Because, let's say, whenever, let's say, viruses are released, they are released, let's say, within, let's say, body fluids. And let's say they have a certain amount of solid matter, mainly, basically, I would say, let's say, proteins and so on. And based on physical standards, as you mentioned, let's say, there is I would call it a physical law, that this initial size distribution generated by a cough or by a breath can be only, let's say, shrink to a certain amount. And there had been also already some very interesting studies regarding this particle size distribution. But we are from the automotive industry, we always go to this, let's say, we have very changeable conditions. Imagine, let's say, the car drives in Siberia, and the car drive, or let's say in Alaska, and the car also drives in California through a desert. So you can imagine the stress on the filter, and therefore we always have this, let's say, worst case approach. So we just want to get, let's say, scientifically based information regarding the, let's say, aerosol particle distribution, and based on this, we work with, let's say, much more fine aerosol concentration in our test rig. And our test rig, of course, is not as impressive as, let's say, the one this was shown before. But the reason for this is quite simple. We work with bioburden, with bacteria, with viruses, and after each run, we have to clean it. And this is for some practical reason, we keep it, let's say, a small size, let's say, but nevertheless, we can test the standard geometry. But to come to the second point with let's say, citric acid or fruit extract impregnation, to put it in simple words, such a filter is something like a trash bin for aerosols. And we are, when the filter is working, let's say, by definition, it collects bioburden. And our approach was, let's say, what is done with this bioburden? And since we can't evaluate, let's say, all critical, let's say, moments and situation of such an automotive HVAC, we also made an approach regarding a worst case. We already assumed that the viral load is already on the, let's say, clean gas side, and afterwards we are testing in our test rig if there is some, let's say, what is called re-aerosolization. And this topic has been already covered a lot in the qualification of face masks before, regarding pandemic situations, because there was always the question, can I reuse face masks? And therefore there was a lot of testing already carried out by face masks. And therefore this approach of re-aerosolization was also, let's say, the second stage when we qualified our new generation of filters to ensure that this, let's say, hypothetically and only, let's say, from the product safety point of view, existing risk is also eliminated. So I think this was my comment from this side so far. I hope it was enjoyable, and I touched a little bit the topic you were talking about.
Yeah, and I've turned to a slide here that you know, about Ford installing your filters by the end of the summer. I guess they're going to be on many of the Ford vehicles, and with the assumption that you're going to get a 99.9 effectiveness in inactivating the viruses. And it seems that inactivation is particularly important. For one thing, removing the filter, if the virus is inactivated, it lessens the danger there. And any of the viruses that then get airborne again and are inactivated as well. Are those the advantages that you see of the special layer?
What is mentioned here, this performance, let's say, this is, let's say, the starting point when we created our product. Let's say it is based on the, let's say, the testing for the inactivation of viruses on textiles. So it's the ISO 18184, and this is somehow the precondition for our additional testing. So a filter who has the capability of inactivating let's say, viruses on its surfaces, has also in the second step to prove that it's efficient in the airflow. Because, let's say, now we have, let's say, a lot of, let's say, discussion is going on regarding what was also mentioned, what is the correct test approach? And we are now in this field in which we have to think about new testing strategy. And our first attempt was really to see what is, let's say, the state of the science. And this is, for instance, this inactivation rate on textiles. And now we go the next step, what we call this, let's say, the suppression of viral shedding. And this will be, let's say, a value, something like PFU or virus copies, let's say, released during a certain test procedure.
Yeah, that's very interesting work. One more question I had here is this coating, this citric acid coating, is it something that could also be applied to the ductwork or you know, other aspects of that cabin air system?
Well, technically yes, but let's say filter. I'm sorry. Filter has always the ability, let's say, that is, let's say, as a standard, a part that is serviceable. So let's say it is a good way, let's say, to change and ensure after the filter lifetime to bring the whole system. But you are right. We already had this request, let's say, from car makers, if citric acid would be also possible, let's say, for let's say a surface coating on an injection molded parts. But this is it's really a technical issue. We were not we didn't go into details right now. But theoretically, of course, it's possible.
I guess.
And also, what is important, maybe important to mention for the US. Let's say I'm not so deep in this topic, but like we have in Europe this biocidal product regulation. You have, I think, the US pesticide regulations, and let's say citric acid is one of the very few substances, let's say, qualified as a minimum risk pesticide. And this gives also, let's say, the people who are handling such products, let's say, an additional, let's say, benefit, because with many substances you can let's say, destroy viruses. The other point is how it's the biocompatibility of such filters in the handling, in the service, and also during the filtration. And this is also something we have covered in our development together with the Test Institute, who is normally focused on the qualification of medical products. So they have also the FDA experience, for instance.
Oh, that's
Yeah, Uwe, I'll add one comment. This is Saru Dawar, also from Freudenberg Filtration. In addition to we've done a lot of testing, internally as well as with third party. As you can see, some of the effectiveness, either through the effectiveness of this coating we are doing, how to demonstrate that on a flat sheet basis, through textile standards or filtration testing we were talking about before as well, like a viral load or a bioburden load for filtration efficiency, whether it's called viral filtration efficiency or particle filtration efficiency. Again, all that is covered as a part of the filter. So we have done a lot of work in testing, as I said, but in the end, it also comes back to, like my colleague was just talking about, from the claims, public health claims, and different regions, whether it is Europe or US, have different government bodies who are part of these regulations. What is right to claim? So for right now, I think the biggest for us, Freudenberg, is working with the regulation bodies in different regions to make sure, yes, we have data, we have done product safety, biocompatibility testing, we have a lot of confidence on the product, but before we are able to make claims, I think we are also working with these government entities to make sure what is the right process of approval we need to make the claims. So just wanted to clarify that.
And
And I know
Saru,
it was made. Yeah.
yeah, let me step in, guys. This is Barry Kellar, also with Freudenberg. I'd like to also say hi to Bob Burkhead. I haven't talked to you in ages, but I think this is important, a very important point, which we've also been communicating with our customers, and in some cases, depending on that customer, and these are automotive OEMs, they also have either assisted or asked us, depending on the region, what can be stated. And so when you look at what we have tested, and you see in red the effectiveness, and again, based on an ISO test for textiles, we're quite confident of how well this product works. However, as we get into regulations and public or claims to the public, clearly in talking with the EPA, FDA, BPR, there are still a lot of bureaucracy, but a lot of restrictions on what they say you're allowed to claim to the public. And so, if we sound a little bit skittish, it's because because obviously Freudenberg wants to make sure it's doing everything that it should be doing legally and to minimize risk, both to the company, but also to the consumers at large. So we're not today going out and putting a big marketing thing saying we have a virus killer. That would be a huge mistake. What we're doing is we're working with the different agencies and our customers to ensure what can be claimed is done properly and follows the processes of these different agencies. So for right now, we think it's quite effective, but we can't do a general consumer-friendly marketing approach to that.
Very, very interesting. What about doing what Purdue is proposing, not only proposing, but moving forward with? I guess they're getting commercial backing now to take something like your citric extract and through an aerosol generator, distribute it through the cabin, possibly with people in the in the car who are capturing and inactivating some of this virus as it's being generated. Purdue is proposing that that their system, as opposed to H2O2 or some of these other deactivation or inactivation aerosols, that they've got one that I believe is the fruit extracts that isn't harmful to people and therefore can be generated while people are in the vicinity. So what about doing something like that in an automobile with your fruit extract?
Well, I mean, what was already mentioned, this is, let's say, more or less also, let's say, a legal issue. And I can also talk, let's say, from the European side of view, because beyond, let's say, the fact what kind of activated, let's say, active substance you're using, let's say, the field of application must also be strictly, let's say, determined. And let's say many of, let's say, what is on the market, for instance, they use substances that are basically only qualified to protect the let's say, the product itself. You're not allowed to make any further claims, let's say, of the positive effects of the environment. For our product, it's different. It is like a disinfectant, let's say, that is approved for, let's say, air conditioning system. But frankly speaking, I would say this is a disinfectant. This is, let's say, by the legal form, qualified for non-exposure to humans, direct exposure. And I don't know when you, in Europe, if you would make a spray out of it, it would comply just with this regular, let's say, definition beyond the technical feasibility. There are two issues. For instance, we have also European car makers, and let's say we have on one side the technical point of view, all what we can say and how great our product is. But on the other hand, there's a definition, for instance, what is a treated article and a biocidal product. And according to this, you can, let's say, make a claim. And when you're not satisfied with this claim, I mean, it's up to your decision still to claim it, but we are Freudenberg, we comply to all legal requirements. So we on one hand provide the technical background to ensure, let's say, the legal standard. And to come back to your question from the beginning, this must be at least from, let's say, from the region I work in, checked that it's also this citric acid or any substance is also covering the correct field of application. And we checked it for our filter. It fits perfectly. It's a best match. It's product type 2 in Europe. Whether it's also capable, let's say, from the legal point of view, to be as a kind of a spray, this must be evaluated. And actually, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess
again, just to put some common sense to it, what we talk about when we talk about treated article exception, registered for such use, these are literally phrases that are in the different, like pesticide regulations. So as more of a, let's just say, a layman's term explanation, if you put on something that, let's say you want to prevent rotting of a piece of wood on your deck, and you say, hey, this will stop this fungus, it's to protect the wood from being deteriorated due to the fungus. If you then say, well, I step on it and I had like an abrasion and it's going to help heal me because I've rubbed my foot on the piece of wood, that's a completely different thing. So when we look at treated article and treated article exception, what we've read, and I personally read the 40 pages, and it's not easy to understand, and we're actually having some third-party specialists to look at this and better explain it to us. It basically says if you're protecting the product, so again, let's take the citric acid, we put it in a cabin air filter, and we would then be able to say the citric acid protects the cabin air filter. We cannot at this point just go and say because the virus goes through the filter, then we protect the people. That really changes how the government, especially in pesticides, EPA, from what we looked at, that very much changes this dynamic of the discussion. And that's why, again, we're a little bit cautious that we don't want to overstep this whole area, because the first discussions with the EPA made, very, very clearly made this quite a serious discussion and deviation or differentiation.
The Purdue patent and initiative is being now, they're under negotiation with some Fortune 500 companies, and the idea is that rather than using hydrogen peroxide, and you have to have nobody in the room and you've got to wait till a few minutes before you can go back into it or something, that with the citric acid or fruit extracts, I forgot exactly how they worded it. It can be assumably done with people in the room, but I would assume that the main use of it would be when people are not, in the room. And so the same thing in cabin air. If it would be something you spray at some point in time when you can ensure that there's nobody in the automobile at the time that it's done. But in any case, I can make sure that that everybody on the call here, has access to that information in our alert on the Purdue activity.
Thank you, Bob. I think actually, hello, Barry and Saru and my colleagues, Freudenberg. I think this is a good news. Actually, when I see this, I feel excited about it because you make a kind of positive step towards how to respond to this COVID-19 or the viruses. And when we see that, actually, it's not actually remind me yesterday we have a lot of discussion related to increasing concerns on indoor air quality. And afterwards, I think the second concern is because people spend a significant time in the car. So Freudenberg takes the leading position if they are moving forward to say what kind of efficiency is minimum required. For example, ASHRAE, CDC or ASHRAE actually recommended that MERV 13 or 14 used for building, for schools or commercial buildings, and used to probably just 8. Bob Wright used to be like 8, MERV 8 should be satisfied, but right now they have to upgrade it to MERV 13. So the next question is how we are going to address air quality in carbon in indoor air quality on the mobile, in the car. So that's very important issues. I hope that there is an organization. So far, I haven't seen any organization take the lead kind of efforts to think about that. Is that the regular cabin air filters already make the requirements, or we should have the higher standard for the cabin air filtration? That's my 2 cents.
No, I mean,
Yeah, I don't know, Uwe, you might want to address this. Christine, just let me give you my perspective as the VP. As sensors, most of our customers now talk about health and wellness within the cabin comfort, health and wellness, healthy air, and as they start to introduce sensors to talk about indoor air quality, I think the first, my general comment in talking with different customers around the world would be everyone's opinion is different, right? So what are they measuring? How are they measuring? What's the purpose of measuring? Whether it's just to say your filter needs to be replaced or let us make you feel better about what level of cleanliness you have in the vehicle. Where do you put the sensor? There's a lot of topics on this. I would say that I wouldn't say we're in the forefront, but we're in that advanced stage of talking with all our customers and how they do it, and there is no one simple standard or one person leading to say this is the level of filtration you need to have a healthy air cabin, right? What we would tell you, whether you're using ionization, because we have activities in that area also, electrostatic precipitators, or good cabin air filters, the one thing that I think we would say, and I think Mr. Haffner already did, is that you have to have a high efficient cabin air filter. A low grade cabin air filter is not the right solution, even though you get more airflow. To start with a high efficiency filter is absolutely necessary. Now that general term of what is a high filter is debatable. Right, but we very clearly would say a 2-layer with microfiber filter is the right approach. And the second thing, because I was down in the industrial side for many years on ASHRAE and 52.2 and Appendix J and all that, the discharge of an electrostatic filter is also something that is being discussed heavily in the automotive industry around the world. And so we talk about real life performance. And so when you look at the introduction of sensors, to look at indoor air quality. It also then brings up the whole topic about electrostatic technologies. What's the best approach? Mechanical, electrostatic, highly electrostatic. What's the best approach there? So, you know, again, my point would be there's a lot of dynamics in this whole talk about automotive indoor air quality today, and there is not one specific leader or one specific standard that everyone's marching to at this point. Mr. Haffner, if you have some further input.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very, very helpful. It's kind of what's the current status, and actually as the professionals working in this industry, or we are so passionate about, you know, the clean environment and the health and safety issues. Currently, we actually like to see, like ASHRAE, they have the guideline. We hope that we can see a similar guideline for cabin air filters in the near future.
Well, I mean, this is a very interesting topic. Also, let's say the key focus in public transportation was in the field of, let's say, how should I call it? Transport, let's say, air traffic. And they pop up the first guideline. Let's say, I think it was issued by Airbus in connection with the European Center of Disease Control. And I was contacting them because they were focusing, let's say, only on certain aspects of, let's say, disease control. And I had some comments on them. And honestly, the reply from them was, it is too technical, we don't have the experts. It sounds shocking. So they refer to the, let's say, individual, let's say, organization like the European, let's say, air traffic safety board and members like this. So I think we are really in the front row of developing, and I would say maybe we set, let's say, a new standard of testing. And this is also my approach when I start with our project, let's say maybe 5 years ago. Let's say basically all the filter testing was done, let's say, on inorganic dusts. And 5 years ago, we started with this topic of the, let's say, let's call it as a working title, anti-allergy filter. We had the first time, let's say, filter testing with real bioburden, like pollen fragments and so on. And we made a lot of experience. And based on that, let's say, we switched to the testing what we already had up our sleeves with bacteria. And so it was quite, let's say, not such a big challenge, let's say, to switch it to let's say, to viral pathogens. And for us, it was very important. Let's say there's also this discussion. I mentioned this word now, like HEPA, and the people only compare, let's say the naked virus diameter, and from my point of view, they don't take into account the actual, let's say, aerosol size distribution. Let's say after the generation of humans from body fluids in this estimation. And therefore, we were working with an institute, or we are working together with an institute which comes from the qualification of medical products. And our approach is to, let's say, generate at least an aerosol that is much finer than the one we could find in the air. And this is some interesting effects. Maybe I tell too much, but we should also, let's say, classical filters, let's say, are maybe particle filters, but our standard filter in the automotive industry is also someone with, let's say, with an activated carbon, let's say, layer. And this is also, let's say, a field of development when we really go into and if they are only, let's say, artificially created ultra-fine aerosols, maybe there's also a positive effect of, let's say, activated carbon covering, let's say, the ultra-finest aerosols. Like these ultra-finest aerosols are something like gas molecules. And this is also an interesting topic we are currently working on.
Yeah, I think that's very important that, you know, the Brownian or diffusional movement of these very fine particles. Again, in our alerts, we're getting into a lot of this. One of the calculations is that we're breathing in every minute. The average individual breathes in 7.5 million particles, 0.1 microns and larger. So in the cabin air or whatever, if you're starting with ambient air quality, you've got these very, very small numbers of large numbers of very small particles. And if there's 7.5 million, 0.1 micron and larger, what are there 0.01 micron and larger? It's many, many millions. So I think, and what I heard you saying is there is a Brownian movement diffusional effect, and that activated carbon with all that surface area may be fairly effective on some of these ultra fine particles. Is that what I'm hearing?
I mean, I got let's say, from the test results lately, when we are now, let's say, finalizing our test procedures, and from checking various kind of filters, we could get the impression, we could really get the impression, at least. But it is also connected to our way to create aerosols, to be honest, So the point is really, seems that we are really creating ultra fine aerosols within our test rig. So as a standard, we are, let's say, use the standard methods of detection for it, and this gives you, let's say, only, let's say, a window what you see from the input particle distribution. So maybe like in many studies, there's sometimes missing when you just look at the headline. You are just missing, let's say, maybe the fine and the coarse parts, because it was not detected by the detection method. This must be also taken into account when you make some literature study on this field.
Those are good points. Well, maybe we should move on here. So the risk of infection compared to the cost of prevention is really, whether it's cabin air or building air, is the question. In the August 18th alert, and by the way, we have these alerts every day, the model for assessing infection risk prepared by the University of Colorado is discussed, and it's actually available free of charge as an Excel program. And the parameters include the infection rate in the population, space conditions, virus release quantity per infected individual, and time spent in the space. And it includes the mask or filter efficiency of the emitter and the recipient. And we're just pointing out here that in an HVAC system, you also then have to take into account the airflow direction, dilution, the HVAC filter efficiency. And if you want to look at it as a circular example, if you move clockwise, everything is very effective, and because you have good airflow. If you go counterclockwise and go directly from the emitter to the recipient, then you've got maximum transmission. So back on what we were talking about before, what is the long-term answer going to be in terms of these efficiencies of these filters? We believe that there will be a proactive program. People like Freudenberg and many of the other people in this industry are going to be carrying the message as to what the advantages are. And my personal opinion is people walking around with cloth masks in environments with MERV 8 filters are the major reason that we have the pandemic. If everybody had an efficient filter, a mask, and there were efficient filters, we wouldn't have the problem. But projecting what is likely to happen, there is a big run on MERV 13 filters right now, but again, MERV 13 filters aren't all that efficient, and therefore we can see maybe the MERV 13 filter market peaking in 2022 and then dropping off, that the MERV 8 market is going to be decreasing rather than increasing, and that MERV 16 market is going to be healthy. But we really think that the H13 market is going to be very robust, and nanofibers and other technologies. And we were just talking about a few minutes ago, if they are able to continuously charge or recharge meltblown media to achieve that level, could be very big. And so, we see the total air filter revenues going up by hundreds of percent over the next few years, and we don't see it tailing off in 2023 and so forth. It won't be growing at the rate, but we do think that for a number of different reasons that I won't get into, that it's not going to disappear. Any comments people have as we go along here, please.
Yeah, let me, Bob, let me speak to this. This is Barry Kellar again. As you know, and I think most know, not to tout our horn, and I'm not sure exactly everyone who's on this call, we obviously started and developed the cabin air filter 31 years ago, right? So we're the inventor of it. I would say that, I don't like all of saying market leader and all this, because it depends on how you quantify that, but we obviously are involved with almost all, if not all, the major OEMs around the world. The things we struggle with is like you said, is, there's a public out there that maybe isn't even aware of a cabin air filter, or a filter is a filter is a filter, and they don't understand. You see that if you go to Walmart, you see people still buying cardboard, fly catchers versus, a 3M, 1500, 1800, whatever. What we would say, the challenge we have in our industry, specific to cabin air filter, is that, while there are some companies like a Tesla that have seen the benefit of allowing for a much larger surface area to keep that pressure drop down, we still have a lot of customers that want better efficiency, but cannot sacrifice or don't want to sacrifice the geographic space that they allot for the car. And so looking at things like ionization that would help capture the particles, better electrostatic charges, all of those kind of things, again, come into play. But with that being said, I can tell you just from a general trend, most of the customers, especially when it's the OEM channel, not IAM, or even in some cases the OES channel, most of the OEMs, especially the real large automotive OEMs, whether it's Korea, China, Europe, North America, all of the trend is to higher efficient filters. I would say that while most would love to have a HEPA filter, as soon as you start talking about a real HEPA filter and you start talking about the size they want it in, and as I think Mr. Haffner already mentioned, airflow and decreased airflow, then you start playing a lot of trade-offs, right? But I would tell you wholeheartedly that we see across the board increased functionality, higher efficiency filter is the trend, and it's not going away. And we think the functionality, so again, this is now talking about an anti-allergen, antiviral, anti-whatever, we think that will stick where it maybe hasn't in the past stuck so well. And again, it's really because of this substantial, horrible pandemic around the world.
I think I hear what you're saying is that the allergen, now people are going to be much more aware of air quality, whether it's allergens or PM 2.5 or the COVID, and there's a public awareness that probably is going to be there in the future.
Yeah, I think so. And again, it goes back to what can you market? How do you communicate to the consumers? How do you move from claims that are based on fundamental science and test results versus marketing hype? Because there's a tremendous amount of that. And that really hurts the industry in automotive, because, I can get on the website today and find 50 virus killers, and probably none of them are, good.
Right.
So, and frankly, probably dangerous to be touting what they say they can do. So I would agree with you. We feel confident that this new awareness will stick, and it really depends on how our automotive customers, continue to communicate this and to really push it as a feature in their vehicles. I mean, I'm not going to buy a BMW because it has a good cabin air filter, right? But with the invent of sensors, and those sensors are very specifically targeted to talk about indoor air quality, I think then you're going to have it's going to escalate quickly. More and more consumers are going to see it, and it's like your check engine light. When that goes off, you say, "Oh, got a problem. I got to do something." And so I do believe that the awareness will come quickly, and combined with the issues of the pandemic, it'll stick much better.
Yeah, I like that check engine light comparison there. That could be pretty powerful.
Well, we saw Hyundai, their Grandeur they have in Korea. They actually incorporated already one for the latest model, and it literally has it says the particle, if you wish, the particle counter performance versus PM 2.5, but it's red, yellow, green. So it does have that simple, hey, if it's red, there's an issue kind of deal.
Yeah, very interesting. We believe that the filters for small air purifiers are certainly going to be growing. For large air purifiers, which is a smaller base, they're going to grow even faster. We believe fan filter units are going to replace partitions. Partitions by themselves are terrible in terms of creating air turbulence, and therefore fan filter units will be a much better replacement. And then, of course, in your HVAC systems, if you're gearing up to H13 rather than MERV 8, there's going to be a substantial increase in those markets. So we see a very substantial market for filters across the board.
I just want to add one more point, Bob, here.
Yeah.
Actually, yesterday, Jim showed one of the fan filter kind of significantly actually works very well to reduce the indoor particle concentration. So we see the same trend, and also the air purifier even in central conditioning rooms, it seems it's more effective, especially when move the contamination source from the inside, not from the outside. Just want to confirm what you just mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah. And then on that subject, what we really need for all this is a value rating system, and that's certainly what we're heavily involved with right now. What the decision to purchase an H13 versus a MERV 8 filter can be justified by the value rating system if properly applied. And this involves life quality decisions. And we were fortunate enough to have a large contract that went on for a year or so with Cardinal Health relative to single-use surgical gowns. And we determined that the only way to fairly evaluate this was to develop a whole new metric for measuring harm and good. And the metric turns out to be quality enhanced life days. There have been articles in hospital magazines on it, and Cardinal Health has used the concept pretty liberally in selling their single-use gowns and showing why, on an overall basis, they were superior to the reusable gowns. But anyway, what we need is a value rating system that takes into account lives saved, sickness averted, and life quality costs avoided. And there's lots of life quality, of course, with lockdowns and all sorts of things. The effectiveness then is the efficiency of the device in removing the virus. And the applicability is related to the virus load, and it's the percentage of the virus load which will enter the device. And then you've got the economic cost, which includes operation. You've got the life quality costs, and then the end result is the net value. And given the much higher efficiency, let's say, of H13 in terms of effectiveness, which would be efficiency, even at relatively low loads, which in this case at 25% load, there's a net value in spending the extra money for a H13 filter. So we think that this approach, and I won't go into the details of the calculations here, whether the difference between a MERV 8 and MERV 13 is very substantial when you've got a very high load, but even when you got a low load, it's still justifiable. And so the relative value, again, even with a 25% of the higher level load, is still justifiable with the H13 filter. And comparing filtration to lockdown, social distancing, and other aspects, I mean, you're paying a big life quality cost penalty for social distancing and certainly lockdowns. You also have the very big economic cost. So when you start putting all these options in a priority list, you see that high efficiency filters are very high on the list. So this is a whole different value ranking than CDC and WHO presently have. But I think the facts are changing, are being conveyed rapidly. And we're seeing new direct evidence that even from methods now which don't damage the virus, but show that viable specimens are being captured after traveling long distances. And that new evidence shows that the quantity of virus in small droplets emanating directly from the lungs is much higher than in cough droplets, which are composed of mucus with diluted virus quantities. The fact that surfactants make up about 4% of the large droplets in a cough means that these droplets evaporate as these droplets evaporate on the mask or filter surface, the surfactant concentration will increase and the surface tension will be reduced to make the formation of smaller droplets easier. And in fact, you almost have bubbles that are going to be produced at some point in time. So in terms of factors affecting the market, and I won't go into a lot of this, but you've got to really take into account all the different virus parameters, placement, pressure loss, filter inventory, and I'll get into that in a minute. Air quality, what are the number of air changes and the trade-off between higher amounts of air changes versus higher efficiency, air direction, again, the fan filter units, isolators, pollution combination, very important that we take into account outdoor and indoor pollution as well as the COVID. And then the processes, rooms and elevators, reception cashier counters, and all these different things. And again, I'm going to skip through this efficiency comparison because I think most people in the line are quite familiar with it. But, in this 0.3 micron range, everything up through the MERV 16 filter, has less than a 70% capture rate. So the necessity of getting higher efficiency filters is pretty apparent here. And when you figure, for instance, children wearing masks will be generating small aerosols, and a MERV 16 filter will only remove 70% of the virus. And we just point out that in a pharmaceutical facility, you clean up the air to remove 99.999% of the virus to protect a vial of pharmaceuticals. So something compared to 70% in a schoolroom, it's a pretty small number, big drastic difference. In terms of what needs to be done, the MERV 8 filters out there and MERV 11 filters are where most of the present building, certainly in the residential area, are, and a little bit less so in the commercial, but there's almost no MERV 16, 15 inventory out there. Now, this is somewhat changed in other countries, but in a lot of these other countries, forced air is not even that big a percentage of the total. So you've got some other questions there as well. And this is a reiteration to an extent of what we've just been talking about, but analysis and then collaboration. We've got between the cabin air automotive industry and the air filtration industry and all these different suppliers and associations, we need to come up with these value ratings. And I just want to make one point relative to this quality of life. And it's a very difficult concept to get your hands around, but we've done it by just saying how do people value life? And nobody wants to live to 100 in isolation, and they'd rather drive a car and eat ice cream and live to 85. So we already have got a value rating system. And my point here in this one is, we're willing to take the risk to drive at 65 miles an hour. In fact, we've done that in the United States here, where it used to be 55 miles per hour. But we're not willing to take the risk to raise it to 100 miles an hour because of what would happen. And I think it's, how do we arrive at that equivalent of the 65 mile an hour speed limit when it comes to our filter decisions? And fan filter units are going to be better than partitions. Ortner in Austria is putting these fan filter units above the cashier counters. They've done a lot of studies which shows, obviously, you've got very low virus quantities coming down. The virus that is captured does go up behind the patrons. So I won't, but I think that's another big example here. Big box stores, the same sort of, you don't want to go as far as a clean room because that's too expensive, but to the extent that you can have laminar flow directly from the ceilings, rather than the virus coming up through the across the breathing zone from one person to another, is the way that needs to be done. And we did talk about the Freudenberg people mentioned the challenge of the higher energy requirements and space and so forth. But one of the trade-offs is the depth of filters, and a 4-inch filter at MERV 16 can be as efficient as no more pressure drop than a 1-inch MERV 8 filter. So we have a lot to learn from the gas turbine industry, because gas turbines are breathing in an ambient air just like people are. And a lot of work here shows the huge difference in the amount of particulate that's in the ambient air and the amount that actually gets into a gas turbine with E12 versus E10 or F9 performance. And here's one chart that shows that just the difference between MERV 14 and MERV 16 is 9 times differential on 0.3 micron particles. We mentioned the particle size distribution, and here's just one graph that supports what he said in terms of it's not just the most penetrating particle size, it's the whole range of efficiencies throughout the particle size distribution here. And then just lastly, and I won't get into any of the details here, but each of these applications has its own unique requirements, varying virus loads, and whether it's transportation, entertainment, dining, or sports. So I'd like to ask if there are any final thoughts or questions people have here about the subjects that were discussed. If not, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. You'll receive a link to the YouTube presentation here. Also, if you do want the PowerPoints, let us know and we'll send you a copy of the PowerPoints. Otherwise, we look forward to talking to you again. Hope you have a nice weekend. Bye now.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Very
Thank you.
much. Everyone have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.